The morning air over northern France hung thick with smoke and disbelief. It was late summer, 1944, and the German Panzerwaffe still believed they ruled the fields of Europe. The Panther tank, sleek, menacing, and feared, had earned a reputation as the invincible predator of the battlefield. Its 75mm KWK-42 gun could tear through Allied armor before most American crews even saw where the shot came from. Its sloped armor, an innovation born from lessons learned on the Eastern Front, deflected enemy shells like rain on steel. To its crews, the Panther was more than a machine, it was survival wrapped in armor, precision, and pride. But in the rolling countryside of Normandy, something was changing, quietly, invisibly, inside the American armored divisions pushing inland from the beaches. A new weapon had arrived. It didn't roar louder than the Panther. It didn't look particularly menacing. But when it spoke, it carried a message that shattered German confidence. This was the 76mm M1 gun, fitted onto the latest variants of the M4 Sherman, a gun the Germans had not expected, and one that would soon punch holes in the myth of Panther invulnerability. At first, the Panther crews laughed at the Shermans. Reports from the front told them that Allied tanks were weak, thin-skinned, and poorly armed. Many veterans of the Eastern Front saw the Shermans as no threat at all, just another version of the old M4, whose 75mm gun had bounced harmlessly off Panther glacis plates since the earliest encounters. But as the Americans advanced through the bocage, those claustrophobic green walls of Normandy, something unsettling began to happen. Panthers that had once ruled the battlefield were now being knocked out at distances they thought were safe. Penetrations appeared where none should have been possible, clean holes through side armor, and sometimes, shockingly, through the frontal plates at over 1,500 yards. Inside German command posts, tank recovery units began reporting wrecks with unfamiliar entry wounds. The engineers were puzzled. The armor wasn't failing, it was being defeated. Something new was in play, and it wasn't Soviet. It wasn't British. It was American. The 76mm M1 gun had been born from frustration. For months, U.S. tankers had complained that their 75mm guns, though excellent against infantry and light armor, couldn't stand up to the new generation of German tanks. The Army Ordnance Department responded by creating a weapon that could match, even surpass, the ballistic performance of the German long 75mm. The new gun fired a high-velocity round capable of piercing thick armor at range, and when paired with the M62 APC shell or the later HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing, ammunition, it could turn even a Sherman into a deadly ambusher. Still, when the 76mm version of the Sherman first arrived in Europe, few German crews even knew it existed. Most Panther units believed the Americans were still fielding the same 75mm models that had struggled in Italy and North Africa. That ignorance would prove fatal. The first real test came near St. Lo, where elements of the U.S. 2nd Armored Division clashed with German Panzer units. It was here that a Sherman equipped with the new 76mm M1A1 gun found itself facing a Panther at over 1,200 yards, a distance at which the Americans were usually outmatched. The Panther crew spotted movement, swung its turret, and fired first. Its shell screamed across the field, missing by inches. The Sherman returned fire. One shot. The 76mm round hit the Panther's side armor just behind the road wheels. The German tank stopped dead. Smoke poured from its hatches. The crew didn't laugh anymore. As the weeks passed, reports spread among U.S. tank battalions. "The new gun works," they said. "We can take them now." For the first time since Normandy, American tankers felt the psychological weight lift. They could fight, not just survive. But on the German side, the shock was deeper. Panther crews had been trained to believe in their invincibility. Their instructors had told them that no Allied tank could penetrate their armor frontally beyond a few hundred meters. Yet now, units were being hit and destroyed at ranges once considered untouchable. Word spread like wildfire through the panzer brigades, whispers of a new enemy weapon, unseen but deadly. Panther commanders began questioning their range assumptions. At 1,500 yards, one crewman wrote later, "We believed we were safe. But the first shot came, and our loader was killed instantly. The shell came through the side as if it were paper." This psychological blow was as devastating as any shell. For months, the German army had relied on the aura of superiority surrounding its tanks. The Panther's combination of mobility, armor, and firepower was supposed to dominate any confrontation. Yet now, its very reputation became its downfall, because when confidence turns to arrogance, surprise becomes lethal. The Allies, however, didn't win through superior machines alone. What the 76mm M1 brought wasn't just better penetration, it brought parity, the sense that the Americans could finally stand toe-to-toe with the enemy. Tankers began to adapt their tactics: longer-range ambushes, coordinated fire, use of smoke to conceal movements. They learned where to hit, under the gun mantlet, through the lower glacis, or into the turret sides. The new gun didn't make the Sherman invincible, but it gave its crews a fighting chance, and that changed everything. By August 1944, the German High Command could no longer ignore the mounting losses. Reports from France and Belgium indicated that Panthers were being knocked out with increasing frequency, sometimes by a single hit from a new type of American gun. The technical officers initially suspected British 17-pounders, but the battlefields told another story. These weren't Fireflies. These were standard U.S. Shermans. The realization struck hard: the Americans had caught up technologically, and they had done so quietly. In after-action reports, Panther survivors described the confusion. "We did not expect penetration at such distance," one recalled. "At first, we thought our armor was defective. But metallurgical inspections proved otherwise, the steel was as strong as ever. The difference was the weapon that faced them." Meanwhile, on the American side, tank commanders grew bolder. They sought out hull-down positions, using their improved firepower to engage from range. The battles that followed, at Falaise, Mortain, and across the Siegfried Line, demonstrated that the Panther's dominance was ending. The war of armor had entered a new phase, one defined not by shock and awe, but by adaptation and innovation. And so, as 1944 turned toward its bloody conclusion, the myth of the untouchable Panther began to die, one penetration at a time. What the Germans never expected was not just a new gun, but a new mindset, one that refused to be outmatched again. In the shattered ruins of post-Normandy Europe, the Panther's legend still stalked the minds of Allied soldiers. To many, it was the ultimate predator, fast, thick-skinned, and lethal. But within the armored columns of the Wehrmacht, another story was unfolding. The same pride that once fueled German superiority now began to twist into disbelief. How could the invincible be defeated? How could the hunter become the hunted? The answer lay in miscalculation, a blend of overconfidence, arrogance, and ignorance. When the Panther first rolled onto the battlefield in 1943, it was meant to be Germany's great equalizer against the Soviet T-34. Its sloped armor, advanced optics, and long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun made it the most technically advanced tank in the world. It could destroy enemy armor from over 2,000 yards while remaining impervious to return fire. Against the early Shermans and Churchills, it was a nightmare. American crews quickly learned that their shells bounced harmlessly off the Panther's glassy plate even at point-blank range. This early success gave German crews a dangerous sense of invulnerability. They were trained to engage from long distances, to dominate with first-shot kills. The doctrine was clear: the Panther would never fight on equal terms. Every engagement would be on German terms: sight first, fire first, kill first. But the battlefield rarely respects doctrine. By the summer of 1944, as the Allies poured through France, Germany's elite tank divisions were being forced into defensive actions. Terrain, logistics, and constant air attack stripped away the tactical advantages the Panthers had once enjoyed. Instead of open steppes or wide fields of fire, they found themselves trapped in hedgerows, ambushed in narrow lanes, and targeted by artillery and fighter bombers. Their superior optics were useless if the enemy was waiting behind a wall of foliage 50 yards away. Their armor meant little when supply convoys were destroyed before reaching the front. And into this chaos came the 76mm M1, the quiet equalizer. The first encounters caught the Germans completely off guard. Many Panther crews simply didn't realize the Americans had upgraded their guns. After all, the Shermans still looked the same. Same silhouette, same armor thickness, same reputation. But inside that familiar turret was something new: faster muzzle velocity, improved ammunition, and gunners trained to exploit the weak points of the German cats. When the first 76mm HVAP rounds hit, they left a signature unlike anything the Germans had seen from American weapons. The entry holes were clean, sharp, and catastrophic. Often, the impact caused internal explosions, detonating ammunition racks and blowing turret hatches sky-high. At first, German engineers believed these kills were the result of aircraft rockets or artillery, not tank fire. The truth came slowly, and painfully. For Panther crews, the shift was psychological as much as physical. The one supreme confidence that had fueled their bravery turned into hesitation. Where once they advanced boldly across open fields, they now paused, scanning nervously for unseen threats. Commanders began ordering their units to engage at longer distances, to avoid direct confrontations with Shermans when possible. But the battlefield rarely allowed such luxury. In one report from the 116th Panzer Division, a tank commander described his shock. "We had taken position on a ridge overlooking a valley. Visibility was clear. Two Shermans approached from the tree line at roughly 1,500 meters. We fired first, missed. They returned fire. The first hit pierced the lower front plate of my comrade's Panther. It burned instantly. We had been told no Allied gun could do this." Moments like that shattered morale more effectively than any propaganda could repair. The Germans had built their armored core upon the idea of technological superiority, a belief that their machines were simply better. And for a time, they were. But in war, superiority is fleeting. Once the enemy adapts, pride becomes a weakness. The Panther's fatal flaw wasn't just its overconfidence, it was its design philosophy. German engineers had pursued perfection at the cost of practicality. The Panther was a masterpiece of engineering but a nightmare of maintenance. Its complex transmission, fragile final drive, and limited spare parts made it difficult to sustain in long campaigns. The Americans, on the other hand, built for reliability and numbers. A Panther might have been superior one-on-one, but it couldn't fight 10 Shermans at once, especially when those Shermans were faster to repair, easier to refuel, and now armed with guns that could penetrate its armor. In tactical terms, the battlefield equation had shifted. The 76mm M1 didn't make the Sherman a better tank overall, it made it good enough. And, good enough, in the hands of a determined army meant doom for a machine built on the illusion of invincibility. As one American gunner later said, "We didn't need to be perfect. We just needed to be close, and shoot first." By mid-1944, that pragmatic approach was paying off. American tank battalions moved with greater confidence, coordinating with infantry and air support in a way the Germans could no longer match. The 76mm gun became not just a weapon, but a symbol, proof that the Allies had caught up. Inside the German High Command, panic simmered beneath the surface. Reports from field officers grew more frantic. Panthers destroyed by single hits. Crews abandoning vehicles after unexplained penetrations. Rumors that the Americans had stolen German shell designs or captured secret technology. In reality, the explanation was simpler: adaptation. The Americans had studied the Panther, learned its vulnerabilities, and armed themselves accordingly. The new gun's impact went beyond armor and steel. It attacked the core of the German war machine, the belief that German engineering alone could win the war. As the front lines collapsed in France and Belgium, the Wehrmacht's tank forces began to wither. Spare parts ran out. Fuel became scarce. And every loss of a Panther was more than a tactical setback, it was a psychological one. Even elite SS divisions began to lose their aura of fear. Allied intelligence noted that captured Panther crews were less confident, more cautious, more uncertain. They no longer described the Sherman as a coffin on tracks. Instead, they called it the tank with the long gun. By autumn 1944, Panther losses had reached staggering levels. Many were destroyed not by direct hits, but by abandonment, mechanical failures, lack of fuel, or crews unwilling to risk combat against unseen enemies armed with powerful new weapons. The myth of superiority had finally cracked. And yet, even in defeat, the German crews couldn't understand how it happened. To them, it was impossible that the Americans, whose tanks had once seemed laughably inferior, had closed the technological gap so quickly. But that was the true power of the Allied war machine, not brilliance, but adaptability. The Panther was born from innovation. The 76mm M1 was born from necessity. And in war, necessity always wins. As the winter of 1944 approached, the stage was set for the final and most brutal armored confrontations of the Western Front. In the forests of the Ardennes, under snow and steel, the two philosophies would clash one last time, arrogance versus adaptation, pride versus pragmatism. And there, the Panther would learn the ultimate lesson: even the strongest armor cannot protect against the truth. The winter of 1944 was unlike any other in the European theater. The Ardennes forest, silent and buried under a thick layer of snow, became the stage for one of the most desperate and deceptive operations of the Second World War. The German High Command called it Unternehmen Wacht dem Rhein, the Watch on the Rhine, but history would remember it simply as the Battle of the Bulge. It was Hitler's last gamble, a final attempt to split the Allied front and recapture the initiative. And leading the armored spearheads of this colossal counteroffensive were hundreds of Panther tanks, the pride of the Panzerwaffe. Their crews, many veterans of the Eastern Front, were confident. They believed they were about to prove once again that no Allied weapon could stop them. But beneath that confidence lay something unspoken: fear. For the first time, Panther commanders were not entirely sure of their superiority. Reports from France had shaken their faith. Rumors swirled that the Americans had a new gun, one capable of piercing their armor even from long range. Few had seen it. Fewer still believed it. But in the cold forests of Belgium, that doubt was about to turn into horror. The attack began on December 16, 1944. Under cover of snow and fog, German armor surged forward through the Ardennes, crashing into lightly held American lines. The initial success was overwhelming. Entire divisions were thrown into chaos. Columns of Shermans were destroyed on roads slick with ice and mud. German morale soared. Once again, the Panthers were on the offensive, their long guns spitting fire, their engines roaring like beasts in the mist. But the euphoria didn't last. As the weather cleared, the Americans regrouped. Reinforcements poured in, veteran tankers from Patton's Third Army, fresh divisions equipped with the M4A3E8 Easy 8 Shermans, and an ever-growing arsenal of 76mm M1 guns. The German advance, once unstoppable, began to slow. It was in these bitter engagements, in frozen towns like Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and Clairvaux, that the myth of the Panther met its reckoning. Panther crews, accustomed to dictating the terms of battle, now found themselves hunted. The Americans had learned from months of experience how to fight their enemy. They no longer charged blindly into ambushes, they stalked their prey, used terrain, called in artillery, and coordinated every movement. The 76mm M1 gun became their equalizer, a precise, fast-firing weapon that turned every encounter into a deadly contest of reflexes and nerves. One account from the 10th Armored Division tells of a duel near Bastogne that perfectly symbolized this reversal of fortune. A Panther, positioned on a ridge, spotted a column of Shermans crossing open ground. It fired, missing its mark by inches. Before the crew could reload, a Sherman Easy 8 returned fire. The 76mm round struck the Panther's turret ring. The result was catastrophic. The turret jammed, smoke billowed, and within seconds, the German tank erupted in flames. The Sherman commander, speaking later, said quietly, "We used to pray our shells would do something. Now, we expect them to." That single sentence captured the transformation of the American armored force, from underdogs to equals, from survivors to hunters. The psychological tide had turned completely. In radio intercepts, Allied intelligence began hearing desperate German transmissions, Achtung, long-gun Shermans. For the first time, German crews were identifying specific American variants as major threats. Their doctrine, which once centered on exploiting superior range, was collapsing. The Americans could hit back, and they could hit hard. By late December, the Battle of the Bulge had become a slaughterhouse of machines. The snow was blackened by burning fuel, the forests echoed with the shriek of ricochets and the thundering of engines. The Panther's mechanical weaknesses, long known but ignored, now became fatal flaws. In the bitter cold, transmissions froze, engines stalled, and fuel lines cracked. The logistical chaos of the offensive left many Panthers stranded and abandoned. Some were destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture, others were left behind in ditches, silent monuments to overconfidence. Meanwhile, the Americans, though battered and bloodied, kept coming. The 76mm M1 allowed them to engage at ranges where once they had been helpless. Tank destroyer units, equipped with the M18 Hellcat and M36 Jackson, joined the fight, delivering devastating ambushes from forest edges and frozen fields. Every day, the German advantage shrank. Every night, Panther crews whispered the same grim truth: the Americans were no longer outgunned. At Foy, a Panther platoon from the 2nd Panzer Division attempted to flank a U.S. column. Before they could line up their shots, they were spotted by a forward observer directing Sherman fire. Within moments, 76mm shells rained down from multiple angles. 2 Panthers were hit. The survivors retreated, their commanders furious. In their reports, they noted the same detail: penetration at over 1,400 meters. Unknown American weapon. Unknown. Even in defeat, many refused to believe that such firepower could come from the humble Sherman. Yet the truth was there, buried beneath the snow, proof that the 76mm M1 had changed everything. The Ardennes campaign also revealed another crucial factor: the power of numbers and coordination. While the Panther was a masterpiece of engineering, it fought alone. Its crews were brave, but their command structure was rigid, and their logistics crippled. The Americans, by contrast, fought as a system: tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support moving as one. A single Panther might destroy 2 Shermans in an ambush, but within minutes, it would be bracketed by artillery or strafed by thunderbolts. Even the mightiest armor meant little when surrounded by overwhelming firepower. The 76mm M1 didn't just penetrate steel, it shattered the myth that German precision could overcome American mass. By early January 1945, the Bulge had collapsed. The Panthers, once symbols of German might, now littered the roadsides of Belgium and Luxembourg, burned out, frozen, and silent. Their blackened hulls stood as a warning: arrogance is the armor that cracks first. The Americans pushed forward, their spirits high. Every tank crew knew that their gun, once dismissed as inadequate, was now a proven killer. They could match the enemy shot for shot, and that confidence radiated through every unit. The 76mm M1 had become more than a tool of war, it was a symbol of perseverance, ingenuity, and adaptation. The Ardennes marked the end of the Panther's reign. Though it would fight on until the war's final days, it would never again dominate the battlefield as it once had. The world had changed. The hunter had become the hunted. In the months that followed, as the Allies crossed the Rhine and drove into the heart of Germany, Panther crews would remember the winter of 1944, the cold, the fear, and the moment when they realized that the enemy they had underestimated was now their equal. And somewhere, among the wrecks of those once mighty machines, the snow continued to fall, soft, indifferent, and eternal, covering the broken steel of pride with the quiet truth of defeat. As the war drew toward its thunderous end in the spring of 1945, the fields of Europe lay strewn with the skeletons of tanks, Panthers, Shermans, Tigers, and countless others, each now silent witnesses to the arrogance and ingenuity of men. Their rusting hulls were more than wreckage, they were lessons written in steel. Lessons about evolution, adaptation, and the fatal cost of underestimation. For the German crews who had once sat inside the mighty Panther, the message came too late. They had trusted in the invincibility of their machine, in its thick armor, in its perfect optics, in the doctrine that no Allied tank could stand before it. But war is not won by perfection, it is won by momentum, innovation, and the will to adapt faster than the enemy can react. And that was where the Americans, armed with their humble yet deadly 76mm M1 gun, triumphed. When the first M4A1, 76, W Shermans appeared in the summer of 1944, few could have predicted the quiet revolution they represented. To most soldiers, they looked the same as every other Sherman. The true change lay inside the barrel, a new high-velocity weapon capable of flinging shells faster, farther, and with greater precision than any previous American tank gun. The 76mm M1 was not born from ambition, but from necessity. American engineers knew that their 75mm guns could no longer compete with the increasing armor thickness of German tanks. The decision to upgun the Sherman wasn't about building a super tank. It was about giving crews a fighting chance. In the crucible of modern warfare, survival was the real currency. This pragmatic design philosophy would define the next generation of Western tanks. Instead of chasing perfection, the Americans embraced versatility, guns that could kill tanks but also fire effective high-explosive rounds for infantry support, engines that could be maintained in the field, and designs that could be mass-produced by the thousands. The Germans, meanwhile, had fallen into the trap of complexity. The Panther, while beautiful in its engineering, demanded resources Germany no longer had. Each one required hundreds of man-hours to build, and when it broke down, as many did, spare parts were scarce. The Americans could afford to lose Shermans, the Germans could not afford to lose Panthers. In the arithmetic of war, efficiency defeats elegance, but the legacy of the 76mm gun went far beyond numbers. It reshaped the psychology of armored warfare. Before its arrival, American tank crews lived under a shadow of fear. They called their tanks Ronsons, like the lighter, they joked, they lit up the first time. Facing Panthers and Tigers had often been an act of bravery more than strategy. The odds were against them, and many paid the price for it. With the new gun, that fear began to fade. Tankers could finally engage the enemy with confidence, not desperation. They learned that the Panther wasn't invincible, that its sides and turret could be penetrated at long range, and that precision and teamwork could offset raw armor. For the first time, American gunners fought not as prey but as equals. That shift in mindset changed the rhythm of the battlefield. Suddenly, the Germans weren't dictating the pace. The Americans were. Shermans advanced with boldness, often forcing German tanks to reveal their positions. Once spotted, the combination of 76mm fire, artillery, and airstrikes would do the rest. It wasn't just technology that changed, it was belief. The belief that the underdog could evolve faster than the giant, that adaptation could overcome intimidation. In the months that followed, as the Allies crossed the Rhine and pushed into Germany's heartland, the Panther became a ghost of its former glory. Its once feared silhouette was now just another wreck on the roadside. Fuel shortages left many immobilized, their engines silent in the mud. Abandoned Panthers were often captured intact, and American engineers studied them closely, measuring armor thickness, analyzing weak points, and comparing ballistic impacts from the 76mm gun. The findings were remarkable. In multiple tests, the M1's high-velocity armor-piercing rounds were capable of penetrating Panther side armor at over 1,500 yards, distances once thought impossible. Even the frontal armor, if struck at the right angle or with HVAP ammunition, could be breached. The results vindicated the men who had risked everything in Normandy and the Ardennes. Their stories, of duels fought in fog, of shells ricocheting, of tanks burning, now formed the living testimony of how innovation turns the tide of war. Historians would later note that it wasn't any single weapon that won the war, but rather the capacity to innovate faster than the enemy could react. The 76mm M1 embodied that principle perfectly: simple, effective, and timely. The Panther, in contrast, represented the opposite, a marvel of design trapped in a collapsing system that could no longer sustain it. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, and the war in Europe ended, the world entered a new age of military thought. Engineers, generals, and strategists studied every lesson the war had written. They examined the ruins of German and Allied tanks alike, asking one question: what made the difference? The answer, as always, was balance. The 76mm M1 gun was a bridge between eras, the link between the brute force tanks of the early war and the precision firepower of the modern age. Its influence could be traced through the design of the M26 Pershing, the Patton series, and eventually the M60. Each inherited the same philosophy: not to outbuild the enemy, but to outthink them. Armor could be thickened. Guns could be lengthened. But the true weapon was adaptability. For the Germans, the post-war reflection was painful. Surviving Panther and Tiger crews wrote memoirs filled with pride and bitterness. Many blamed the shortages of fuel, ammunition, or air cover. Few admitted the deeper truth, that their overconfidence had blinded them to change. One Panther commander, writing years later, put it best: "We believed that engineering alone could win wars. But wars are not fought in factories. They are fought in minds." That realization echoed across decades. The story of the Panther and the 76mm M1 became more than a tale of machines, it became a parable of warfare itself. The greatest enemy of strength is the refusal to evolve. Today, the wrecks of those tanks still rest in forests, fields, and museums. Some are restored, their engines once again growling to life for exhibitions and commemorations. Visitors stare at their massive hulls, at the gouges left by armor-piercing rounds, and imagine the terror and courage of those who once fought inside them. If you look closely, you can still see the faint scars where 76mm shells struck, clean, surgical holes in armor that was never meant to fail. Those scars tell the story better than words ever could. They tell of young American gunners who refused to surrender to fear, of German crews who discovered too late that no tank is invincible, and of a weapon that changed not just the outcome of battles, but the very philosophy of war. In the end, the Panther's downfall and the 76mm's triumph remind us of an eternal truth: every weapon, no matter how advanced, meets its match, not in a stronger weapon, but in a smarter one. The 76mm M1 gun was never the biggest, nor the most famous. But it was the one that made the enemy question everything they believed. It pierced more than armor, it pierced illusion. And on the battlefields of Europe, from Normandy to the Ardennes, that quiet realization echoed louder than any cannon. Because in the end, the true power of war lies not in the steel that fights it, but in the minds that adapt to survive.